Are you struggling to conceive? You have options, and at Piedmont Reproductive Endocrinology Group, we'll make sure you have the guidance and support you need. PREG is known for individualized fertility care that's unique to every patient. We take the time to provide a reassuring and empowering experience because we believe that you deserve nothing less. Let us help you on your journey to parenthood. Visit us at pregonline.com to learn more. Get the guidance and support you need at Piedmont Reproductive Endocrinology Group.
The ideal driver on their highway wouldn't drive above the advisory speed limit. So it's kind of like a little game. Like, yeah, you can drive whatever speed you want, but if you mess up, it's going to be worse because if you were a good driver, you'd be driving the speed that we suggested anyways. My name is Richard Dix, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week, I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen? All right, welcome back for another episode of How Did That Happen? HDTH. This week it is episode 65, and we're going to talk about the Interstate. Should be a good episode. I learned a lot. This was one that I think to me, there's so many different things that go into making an interstate. You never think about all the different parts of it, all the different little facets that create this entire system, and we really kind of break down why they are the way they are. You know, the numbers, the roads, everything. So it should be a good one. As always, head over to hcthappen.com for all the extras. You'll find the work cited over there, some pictures that kind of show you where I got my information from. At hcthappen at hcthappen on all the socials, mainly Instagram and Twitter. As always, what am I watching? I just watched that Megan movie, the one with the killer robot. Pretty good. I actually watched it twice. It is actually, I may watch it again. It's to me, it's just different. And I realized it's definitely got like Chucky vibes, but it's more like an evolution from Chucky. And since I've actually watched that, I've gone back and started to watch Chucky too. Realized I'm really just into like killer dolls. I don't know. I didn't really know that about me, but no, if you get a chance to see it, it's funny. It's funny and it's interesting, which movies have a hard time hitting both of those. You can usually hit one, but you can't always hit both. I streamed it on Peacock. If you're wondering, I didn't actually go see it in theaters, so if you have Peacock, it's on there. What am I listening to? I've gotten back into my audiobook phase. I'm going through one of those. I love audiobooks, but there's just times I put them down and pick them up. But right now I'm listening to a book called Born to be Hanged, and it is about pirates in the 1600s who are in Panama, and it's about a lot of things, but the main story I think is like they're trying to get this Panamanian princess back from the Spanish people who have taken her from the natives of Panama, and it's like all this stuff. But you learn so much about pirates, which is why I'm going to put that on the list for things to be done for How Did That Happen, just to find, because I learned pirates are nothing like what we thought they were, or what they're portrayed as in movies and stories. This is a real, it's nonfiction. This isn't just, they're not writing about some Pirates of the Caribbean or whatever. And you realize these guys, some of them I didn't realize were like land-owning men in other countries. They just chose to be criminals. They have their dudes would like own land in like London or whatever. But then how are you gonna make your money? I don't know. I don't want to do a regular 9 to 5. I want to rob people. So they do, but yeah, a lot of stuff, like you find out the Jolly Rogers, which is the skull and crossbones, didn't really exist until like the late 1700s or early 1800s. So like they weren't like the pirates that we know, or that we know that are written about in portrayed. They were never flying a pirate flag. They just weren't. And a lot of them were they would kind of do the bidding of the bigger countries, out on the seas. Like the English kind of had their own pirates, the Spanish kind of had their own pirates. Stuff I didn't know. You feel like, I feel like pirates are almost something that people see as fiction, but they really exist, and they still exist now. But yeah, so that's what I'm listening to. Really good book. I got it at the library, but I'm sure you can get it wherever you can find books, Amazon. But yeah, as always, if I plug those shows or these books, I can do my own. Every Thursday at 4:30 a.m., you can find bite-sized bios. It comes out. We pick a person from history and just profile their lives. And what I'm trying to bring back to a bite-sized portion, the last couple episodes I've gotten a little long-winded, but I find myself just talking about the people that I find interesting, and it just goes a little long. Our last one was about Malcolm X, who was BSB number 22. That was pretty good. We've covered a bunch of different people. Jackie O, Nelson Mandela, Morgan Freeman. We do Shakespeare. We've done Benjamin Franklin, Grigory Rasputin, a lot of different people. So if you're interested in any of those people, you can go. You'll find it. Even if you're if it's in your feed, and also you can go to the website and read the profiles if you don't actually want to listen to it. As always, like and subscribe wherever you hear this. If you want to give us 5 stars, that's awesome. 4 stars, that's cool. If you want to give us 2 stars and say why you didn't want to give us 5 stars, that's fine as well. Constructive criticism is always welcome. I don't think there's much else to say, so before we get on this ramble train, as we're known to do, without further ado, here is the episode. All right, so if we're going to talk about the Interstate, then we have to talk about what it was like before the Interstate. And so we'll kind of get into that before we start the actual history of it. In 1912, around that time, railroads were the main dominant force in interstate transportation in America, and roadways were primarily of local use and interest. There wasn't this large interconnected, road system. They just didn't exist outside of cities. They really didn't. You would have roads inside cities, but once you left the cities, there was no real way. They weren't connected. So they would have market roads, that were maintained by some of the counties or townships, but maintenance usually was done by the people who lived on the road. That's kind of weird. And many states had constitutional prohibitions that actually stopped people from doing internal improvements, such as road projects and federal highways. That just was something they actually rule against. And so around that time, the country only had about 2 million miles of roads, basically in the whole country, and only I think like they said 8% consisted of what they call improved surfaces. So that meaning that they had done something to make it more of like a road, like put gravel on it or pave it or shells. They say something called oiled earth. I don't know what oiled earth is, but it sounds weird. So the actual first road across America was called the Lincoln Highway, and it was the first transcontinental highway in the U.S. and one of the first highways that was designed expressly for automobiles, because it's something you had to think about before. As time moved forward, people, before the roads were used for horses and stuff, like stagecoaches, so that this is one of the first roads that was made with cars in mind, and it was conceived in 1912 by an Indiana entrepreneur named Carl G. Fisher. It was formally dedicated on Halloween 1913, and it runs coast to coast from Times Square, New York, to Lincoln Park in San Francisco. So I think that's maybe why they call it the Lincoln Highway. I thought it was because isn't there a Lincoln, Indiana, or am I thinking Lincoln, Nebraska? That's it. Yeah, I'm probably off. Let's see. But yeah, the good old Lincoln Highway, it runs through 13 different states: New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, a few others, Colorado, Nevada. There's more than that, but yeah. So it was the initial recorded length of it was 3,389 miles. And they did that in 1913. But over the years, they would do some improvements, and it actually got smaller. I think, because I don't know, because they didn't have to go through so many different areas, but it would go down to 3,142 miles. Oh, and here's the actual reason why. It's called the Lincoln Highway because they dedicated it to Abraham Lincoln. That is odd. I don't know. It's just, I didn't see that coming. But it was dedicated in 1922. And I think it was the first actual national memorial to Abraham Lincoln. That's pretty cool. Because it was made 9 years before the actual huge one in D.C. That's him sitting in that chair. And so when this happened, when they first made the Lincoln Highway, it really did kind of change, I think, people's perspective of the country as a whole. Because it says because it was the first automobile road across America, it brought great prosperity to hundreds of cities. Because you imagine now people can get to all these different cities, and so that you can kind of people can start to experience all the different parts of American culture, and people want to go back, and then you have some sort of tourist, industry, and people can maybe go work in one city and live in another, just like they do now with Interstate. If you think about it, without Interstate, it was almost not impossible, but it was very hard to get to a place that's now maybe 2 hours away. With all the different roads and stuff like that, it probably would have taken you double, if not triple, the amount of time. The Interstate is actually a very intricate piece of technology when you think about it, and is used. I mean, it has definitely changed America. And the Lincoln Highway was affectionately known as the Main Street across America. And so now that will bring us into the first proposals of an interstate. And so the Dwight D. Eisenhower National System of Interstate and Defense Highways, commonly known as the Interstate Highway System, is a network of controlled access highways that form parts of the national highway system in the U.S. And so the first thing that we see that kind of really kicks this forward is what was called the Federal Aid Road Act of 1916. And so when that was passed, basically that provided $75 million over a 5-year period to match funds with all the states to make the construction for the highway. So basically they said, we'll put up 75 million, you put up 75 million, and then we'll make a federal highway that runs through your state. But this really couldn't get kicked off until after World War I, because America couldn't devote, they couldn't put in any funds towards this project, which is still trying to win the war. But what is interesting, and I think if anybody knows, I think one of the small tidbits about the interstate system, which I knew before this, is that Dwight Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, he was the one who created the interstate. He's the reason why we have an interstate. And so if you know that, even if you don't, what's interesting about his connection to it is it actually started 30 or 40 years before the interstate would actually ever go into place and actually become working. So in 1919, the U.S. Army sent an expedition across the U.S. to determine the difficulties that military vehicles would have on a cross-country trip. So basically, they were just like, you all go out here and find out if find out if it's hard to traverse, the environment, or is it really easy, and what kind of improvements can we make. And one of the people that was on that convoy was a young Army officer, Dwight D. Eisenhower. And so they left from they left in D.C. On July the 7th, 1919, and it took them 62 days to drive 3,200 miles on the Lincoln Highway to an Army base in San Francisco. And so while they were out there, their purpose was to road test various Army vehicles and to see how easy or how difficult it would be to move an entire army across the North American continent. And so these guys, their journey, basically, they left Washington, then went into Pennsylvania, then into Ohio, and then they went through the Midwest, and then the Rockies. And imagine doing all this stuff before there was an interstate system. That's why it took them 62 days to go across the country. And so, like I mentioned, Dwight Eisenhower was on this trip, and he was quoted as saying, "We were not sure if it could be accomplished at all, but nothing of the sort had ever been attempted." End quote. And so it was, like I said, it must have been really difficult for them to. I can remember when they said the Rockies, I was like, oh, I forgot about the Rockies. Like, you have to. I imagine there had to have been a lot of construction that had to be done to get through and around those mountains. And so it suffered many setbacks on the route, such as poor quality bridges, broken crankshafts, and engines that got clogged with desert sand. Because America, when you really think about America, and that's what's always I find so interesting about this country, is that there's so many different climates in this country. There is a lot of countries where the weather is all the same because they're not that big. You know what I mean? Like, it's not. This may not always be the same weather every day, based off where you are, but it's like it's all like maybe temperate, deciduous, or whatever. Like, it's all desert climate, or it's all like rainforesty or whatever. But here it's just like you can drive 1,000 miles or 2,000 miles and there'll be a desert. You know what I mean? Or you can go down to Florida and it's like this kind of tropical landscape, and drive up to the Northeast and it's just like snow everywhere. It's just like there's so many different weather climates in America, and I've always found that to be interesting. And so after their trip, in 1926, the U.S. creates the numbered highway system, which was the first national road numbering system for cross-country travel. This is the first time they've put kind of a face to a name with this national highway system. And the roads at the time were still state-funded and maintained by the states. However, there was little in the way of national standards for road design. So they were, it's what you see with a lot of stuff until it becomes kind of the same thing we saw with school buses way back. I think it was in episode 16, something like that. But that, when they first started, they were all different colors. You never think about that, but it's like yellow. Not everybody agreed on yellow when they first started. They were green sometimes and red and different things. But so the roads would kind of be different depending on what state you'd be in. And so in 1954, Eisenhower appointed General Lucius D. Clay. Lucius, love that name. And it's almost the people, because the people that are named Lucius in like fiction, they're always these like fanatical people. I've never met a Lucius in real life. I wonder what they're like. But General Lucius D. Clay, he headed up a committee that was charged with proposing an interstate highway system plan. They could sum up the motivations for the construction of such a system. It was evident that they needed better highways after they took that 2-month trek across America and all their army vehicles, and they needed to make it safe for vehicles to be on the road. And it is true. I mean, we're about to get into more of the actual construction and the beginning of it, but this really was created in part for the army in case something ever happened. In case they had to mobilize, the military very quickly. It was something that until this time was like they saw, not impossible, but it would take a lot longer than what it should in an emergency. And so on June 29th, 1956, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed the National Interstate and Defense Highways Act into law. And then basically it authorized $25 billion for the construction of 41,000 miles of interstate highway system over a 10-year period. And it was the largest public works project in American history at the time. And like I said, you can see it even or hear it even in the title of the act. It was part of the title is defense highways, because there's actually for two reasons. And like I said, first part is that it had to do with the mobilizing of the military, because what you don't realize, if you're not around many military bases, and when I read this, it made a lot of sense because I'm from Hampton Roads, where they're just everywhere. But you realize, because all the bases are connected to the interstate. They are. I never really thought about it. And like I said, if you don't have military bases around you, you probably don't really get to see that and interact with it. But you can get to like any military installation via the interstate like very quickly. And I never thought about that. So that's part of the reason why it's the defense is in the name. And the second reason is because some of the money that was taken that was used to fund it came from the defense budget. So they used like military money to make the initial interstate highway system. And so, like I said, the military would need to be able to mobilize. This was also in the 50s when there was kind of the beginning of the Cold War, and so they were kind of really worried like what would happen if like Russia came over here, or at the Soviet Union at the time were to come over here, and we weren't able to get together. It could be a hindrance, on our part. So that's really is one of the main reasons that we have an interstate system, is they wanted to kind of unite the military. And so there are 3 states that have claimed the title of the first interstate highway, because of course, like everyone's got to be first. Missouri claims that the first 3 contracts under the new program were signed in Missouri on August 2nd, 1956. The first contract signed was for upgrading a section of U.S. Route 66, which I believe we'll talk about a little bit later, to what is now designated Interstate 44. And so that makes them feel like they were the first. There was in Kansas, I think they say they claim to be the first because they started paving right after the act was signed. So it's all this little little nuances that. Oh, I was the first. I wasn't. I'm not really sure who was the. Did I mention the third? Oh, in Pennsylvania, they say they could have also been the first, and they have nicknamed their highway the grandfather of the interstate system. Pennsylvania always wants to be first and stuff. And so I'll run you through a little timeline of the construction, because that's not that interesting, but you do kind of wonder how it went on. So in 1974. Nebraska becomes the first state to complete all of its mainline interstate highways with the dedication of its final piece of I-80. To me, that should be considered the first highway, because all the rest of these guys were like, "Oh, we started working on it." It's like, cool, but did you finish it? When did you finish it? You know what I mean? Nebraska was the first state. Let's see, in 1979, the final section of the Canada to Mexico Freeway, Interstate 5, it was done.
With Miller Mott College's online programs, you can choose when you study. Our online programs give you the flexibility to make education work with your schedule. Earn your degree without derailing your life. Visit us online at miller-mott.edu. That's miller-mott.edu.
And during that ceremony, there were representatives from Canada and Mexico, because it was the first highway that connected all of the countries of North America. So that's actually kind of cool. I never really thought about that. So Interstate 5 connects 3 different countries together. In 1986, the final section of the coast-to-coast I-80 was finally done. It went from San Francisco to New Jersey. And this actually made, when they completed this, it became the first it became the first freeway to basically connect the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. And so there's a lot of little, I guess, these are the first to me that matter more than who was the first person to start working on the highway. Like, but that's not that interesting. But this is, I never really thought about the interstate in this capacity. And then in 1990, the final section of Coast to Coast from Santa Monica, California to Jacksonville, Florida was finished. You never really think about all the different roads that connect. You can really, that's what's cool about the interstate system is like now you can really, if you want to drive from Santa Monica, Florida or Santa Monica, California to Jacksonville, Florida. And I mean, it'll take you some time, but I mean, not nearly as much time as it would have taken if these roads weren't in place. And so finally, on October the 14th, 1992, the original interstate highway system that was planned like way back like 40 years ago was finally considered to be complete. And so the initial, like we said, when they first signed the act into law, they gave them $25 billion. They said, this is what it's going to take. They said, it should take you 12 years, right? Or something like that. And when they finally finished it, it cost $114 billion, and it took them 35 years. So they severely underestimated the amount of time it would take to build this highway system. I always thought that was because you just assume when they made it, oh yeah, they probably made it. It took them 5 or 10 years. They got it done. It's like, no, it took them 35 years, and they came in way over budget. And now we'll touch on a couple little tidbits about the highway system, and then we'll probably be done. Is that there are some interesting stuff you never think about with these highway systems, like the interstate highway numbers, which I'm going to get into right now. So the numbering scheme for the interstate highway system was developed in 1957 by the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. ASHTO is the acronym, if you're wondering. I just saw it here. That's a lot to say. And then you're like, wow, it really has an acronym too. So it's ASHTO is the. So they began numbering dates, or excuse me, they began numbering highways though in 1973. Or excuse me, the way it works now was pretty much finalized back in 1973. Up until then, they were kind of still figuring it out. So it's pretty much been the same for about the last 50 years or so. And so, like a brief rundown, which is something you already probably know if you drive. So that's within the U.S. Primary interstates, also called mainline interstates, or two-digit interstates, are assigned numbers less than 100. So that's why you got like I-64, I-80, I-95. These are the main interstates that run throughout the country. And so, and there are a couple different exceptions to that, but that's the main way it's supposed to work. And then the shorter routes that go around them, the loops and the short connecting roads, spurs as they call them, are assigned 3-digit numbers, where the last 2 digits match the parent route where they came from. And that's something that took me, honestly, maybe like 5 to 7 years ago, I finally understood that. Like, I'm 32 now, so I was probably in my mid-20s before I understood like what 295 really meant. Because around here we're off 95, and so you'll have people that are on like 295, and I'm like, what is 295? Like, what road? That's just a little connecting road to 95, and you know that by the number in front of it. I feel like that should be explained more. I don't know. That maybe that's just me. And so the numbering scheme for primary routes going east to west are they're assigned even numbers, and the ones that go north to south are assigned odd numbers. So there's actually, you never think about, that's the stuff I never think about, like what is in a name, but what is, how do they come, like how do they pick Interstate 5? Like who was, is it just a list? Like but you find there is a rhyme and a reason to it. Then there are tolls. I didn't even really know. I guess there are. You think about it, yeah, there's tolls on interstate highway roads. About 3,000 miles of the interstate highway system have toll roads. And when they first created the interstate, the federal legislation initially banned the idea of the collection of tolls. But most of the toll roads that are in existence now had just been completed or were under construction when they kind of made the interstate system. So they kind of got grandfathered into this, the highway system. And since they really couldn't work around them, and saying basically that they in a lot of cases they provided logical connections to the next like town or whatever. So it's like we kind of have to use this. We're not going to build another one, so we'll just incorporate it in. So that'll bring us to interstate markers. They are always usually red, white, and blue. I never really thought about that. But once again, someone really put some thought into this. It's like that because America, you know what I mean? Like we just live in America and they chose to make the interstates the same color as our flag. I never really, you know what I mean? You drive, the next time you're on interstate, think about all the stuff that we're talking about and think about, I don't know, that someone really had to, I don't know, do it. I've never really put thought into that. And so initially when it first started, they had they'll have the numbers and then they'll have this little space at the top, and the space at the top, which I think is usually red, they used to have the state that you were in, but they kind of took that off and made the numbers bigger so people could see specifically the road that they were on, which is a lot more important, I think, than I know I'm in Arizona, but what road am I on, And so I have some quick facts about the interstate. The longest piece of continuous road, basically that stretches the same highway that goes is 3,000 miles, or about 3,020 miles, and it goes from Boston, Massachusetts to Seattle, Washington. The longest from north to south is I-95. And you can take I-95 from the Canadian border, right near Maine, all the way down to Miami, Florida. The longest segment of road in one actual state is Texas. Doesn't take that much to guess that, and it's 881 miles. So you can drive 881 miles and still be in the same state. That's how big Texas is. And so the shortest, and I've ridden this now that I'm reading this. It's on the Capitol Beltway in DC. It's Interstate 495, and I never really thought about this, but yeah, you're basically going between Maryland and Virginia, but you're in DC in between, and it's 453 feet. Wow, that's interesting. And the next question that we have to hopefully answer, find out how it happens, is where did the speed limit come from? Where did the 55 mile per hour speed limit come from? And so initially there was never, well, there still isn't. There actually isn't a national speed limit. The different states determine the speed limits for themselves. And so what we know as what is considered the national speed limit, this is a very interesting story of how it happened. It comes from when President Nixon signed the Emergency Highway Energy Conservation Act in 1974, because the country was in the midst of an energy crisis that that basically came from a conflict in the Middle East, which then there was a subsequent oil embargo that was imposed by the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, and that created long lines at the gas station. The act was part of a nationwide effort to reduce oil consumption, so they figured, people drive less, they drive slower, they're not consuming as much oil. And so the law prohibited the Federal Highway Administration from approving highway projects in any state that had a maximum speed over 55 miles per hour. And so that is where we get the 55 miles per hour, because people didn't want to lose federal funding, and the federal government was trying to save money on oil, so they picked that speed limit. There's always a story. You look at that and you just think they didn't just pick that number out of thin air. They really had a reason for it. And so that's pretty much the American interstate. I thought that was very interesting to me. I wanted to touch on the Autobahn a little bit before we get out of here, and just some other interstate roadways that have popped up around the world, and then we'll go ahead and move on to the next segments. And so the Autobahn is the federal controlled access highway system in Germany, and the official term is Bundesautobahn, which that sounds cool. Autobahn sounds cool too by itself, but Bundesautobahn translates to federal motorway. And I think the thing that I've always found interesting when you hear about this is like the Autobahn, there's no speed limit, you can drive whatever you want. And so that's basically true, but not quite. There are no federally mandated general speed limits for certain classes of vehicles. So, I think some vehicles do have to maintain certain speed restrictions, but there are some where there isn't. But there are limits posted and enforced in areas that are like urbanized and substandard, like accident prone or under construction. So like there are actual speed limits if there's something happening, or because if you're like in a city space, or like if the Autobahn goes through a city space. And they do post what's called an advisory speed limit, basically saying we don't think you should drive any faster than this amount of speed, which is 81 miles per hour. It's 130 kilometers, and they say, so it's like saying, it's almost like kind of your mom being like, hey, I wouldn't do that, but this is what I would drive if I were you, but you can do whatever you want, I guess. yeah, if you choose to drive the speed limit or over the speed limit, then if something were to happen, then they impose larger punishments on you for having driven at a high speed when the accident happened. Because the true idea, and it's kind of cool. It's like the ideal driver on their highway wouldn't drive above the advisory speed limit. So it's kind of like a little game. Like, yeah, you can drive whatever speed you want, but if you mess up, it's going to be worse, because if you were a good driver, you'd be driving the speed that we suggested anyways. It's a mind game. But the Autobahn opened in 1935. What I think is cool about the Autobahn, and I saw, and it made me think, is like some things really are cooler in other countries. They have emergency telephones that are posted on just throughout the whole highway. And if you look at the American highway system, there's so many movies in America that are made off of being stuck on a highway and with a broken down car and not having access to a phone. It's like that plot is literally erased if you live in Germany. And so there's 17,000 phones that kind of go throughout there. You would think, because people have phones like the regular phones that we have now, that they would have taken them away, but people are still using them. You know, they say they get used up to 150 times a day, you know, out there on average. And when they call, this is also what's cool about it. When whoever they're calling, the location of that phone is automatically like picked up on, so someone knows where you're at, even if you don't know where you're at, or they can find you really fast. It's like a really smart system. But I think that's pretty much it. And that is how the Interstate happened. And now it's time for the roundup. And we're going to round it up. The first national highway was the Lincoln Highway. The Interstate was created in 1956. It would be completed in the 90s. Things I didn't know before. And now I know them. Never heard of these things. What are they? All right, so this week's things I didn't know before. There were just some quirky things. I think that I found. I think when you're dealing with such a large, this is like the whole country. There's just going to be some things that they kind of get left out, and there's just things that also I think that there's not always an explanation, just a ready-made explanation for why some things are done. So there are all but 4 state capitals in the country that are not directly served by the interstate system. So there are 4 state capitals where the interstate doesn't actually go there. It's kind of, and as far as we're talking about, I guess the contiguous United States, but in Juneau, Alaska, the interstate does not directly get there. Dover, Delaware, that's weird. The Alaska one doesn't make sense, but it's more believable. But the interstate doesn't go to Dover, Delaware. Jefferson City, Missouri, and Pierre, South Dakota. Those are all the places where the interstate doesn't actually get there. I suppose they have some sort of connecting road, but it's like, yeah, they're just not actually actively on the highway system. And then the next one was a myth that I do believe I've heard before, but I don't know if I ever put any thought into it or believed it. It was that the idea that 1 out of every 5 miles on the interstate is made straight so that airplanes can land on them. Is that real or not? It turns out to not be a myth at all, or it turns out to not be true at all. It says here airplanes do land on interstates sometimes, but there is no correlation between the creation of the highway system and making them available as like landing strips for planes. The next one was something that I've always wondered and really wished could be a thing. And I haven't seen it in many. I think it's rest stops are different in every state, but all the actual interstate rest stops that I've been on, they're lacking. They could have so much more. They don't sell actual food. I've always been like, why is there not a restaurant here where the rest stop is? I would buy food from them, because you don't have to like fully get off the interstate. You can just pull up, you know what I mean? But they don't have it. And so like the question is, can I set up a business at the rest areas? The answer is no. That is literally written into the act. It says basically section 111 of Title 23, if you're wondering. prohibits the states from commercializing the right-of-way along the interstate system. So basically, the act prohibits the states from making money off the rest areas. But I'm just like, put a hot dog stand there or something, man, because I'd be hungry sometimes when I'm out, on the road. And so it turns out that they really actually thought about this. They really, when they first were creating the Interstate Highways Act that in '56 that created the highway. They were gonna put possibly businesses in those, but they chose not to. They thought somehow that the states could monopolize this with like the same way they could, I guess, with like tolls and stuff. I guess they're trying to keep it, I guess, pretty much all the same. And one representative was literally quoted as saying, if, quote, let the highway traveler turn off the interstate system if he requires food or motor vehicle service, lodging, or anything like that, end quote. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but so they really did be like, okay, so if you're going to be on the interstate, you want food, you have to get off. It's just, you never think about all the different stuff that goes into making these interstates. The next one is why there are wildflowers sometimes in the medians of the interstate. And I've never known. I thought it was just something with I don't really know, that just maybe the way, all right, this is probably what I thought. This is really dumb. I'm going to share. I think just the way that the interstate, and there's so much traffic or something that drives, and the way the weather is with that all comes together that just creates the wildflowers. I've definitely thought about it. I'm not gonna lie, I haven't thought about it. I think everyone has. If you drive, you're riding, you're just like, why are there little flowers out there? Well, the actual reason is to save cost on mowing grass and having to trim the other plant growth. So I guess if they grow that stuff, it doesn't grow like grass. It grows like flowers, which doesn't grow as tall as grass. Interesting. And it is illegal to pick the flowers, if you're wondering. And the last one I have for you is where we get the term freeway. Now, a freeway to me is a more common terminology on the West Coast, or at least, in the Midwest or something like that. Because out here, I think we do just call them highways. We don't call them freeways. Get on the highways. You don't hear people say freeway very much, but you watch movies or people from the West Coast, they say freeway. And I've always wondered what it means. And the term refers to how motorists enter and leave the highway. So it's basically because you can freely get off and on this highway. It's a freeway. I never thought about that, but that of course makes sense. There's no stoplights or stop signs or something like that. It's more just all right, I'm getting off now. Let me change lanes and just boom. I never really thought about that. I mean, that makes sense. It really does. All right, that was interstates, or I kept wanting to call it interstates. There's only one interstate. It's just I had to multiple times when I was recording this, I had to go back and cut that out and say the interstate instead of, because I don't know why it feels more comfortable to say that, but it's not. It's just one interstate highway system. But we learned a lot about it. I didn't realize one of the big things that I didn't know, we talked about, it took them 35 years to make it. You would think that it would have happened, I don't know, they thought in 10 to 12 years. But yeah, 25 bill, and then 12 years turned into 114 billion, and 35 years. So they didn't actually finish the highway system until I was already alive. I didn't know that. I would have thought it would have been done way sooner. But yeah, good episode. Hope you guys liked it. As always, for any of the extras, head over to htthappen.com where you'll find pictures and sometimes videos. We're excited. That shows you where I got all the information from when we are at htthappen on any of the socials. Like and subscribe wherever you find this podcast. It really does help the pod grow. And also it makes it so that if you really like the show, it'll just show up when whenever a new episode is released. I didn't really understand that for a long time. I don't want to just out myself as being someone who's, I don't know, I'm not old, but I didn't know that, if you subscribe, that means that now it just comes to you. So do that if you really like the podcast. Give us 5 stars if you want to. It'd be awesome. If you want to give us 2 stars, tell us why you didn't want to give us 5 stars. That's fine too. Constructive criticism is always welcome. I think that's about it for the episode, guys. See you in a couple days with the next BSB.
Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
With the Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
This is your captain speaking. We've got clear runway and the weather's fine, but we're just going to circle up here a while and get lucky. No, nothing like that. It's just these cash prizes add up quick. So I suggest you sit back, keep your tray table upright, and start getting lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply. See website for details.